Okay, cool. So as people are still walking in, we'll basically start with maybe 45 seconds of introductions from each member of the of this panel. The topic here will be cloud, and when I was asked to kind of moderate a panel on cloud, it's a very broad topic. So I think one of the kind of the key areas we'll focus on is kind of how do startups, how can they compete with the cloud providers, how can they partner with them, what are some of the go-to-market strategies that have been working for companies that are up and coming in this space. So really quickly, Tomer, I'm co-founder, CEO of a startup called Dremio. It's a data as a service platform. We sell this to enterprises and enable them to make data accessible within their companies to all the different data consumers. So making it much easier so you don't have to do an engineering project every time you want to do something with data. Okay, so we'll do something similar for everybody here. So Jerry Chen from Greylock.
Hello.
Hey, thanks for having me. Jerry, partner at Greylock. I guess most relevantly, I've invested in cloud companies like Docker in the infrastructure space, Cato Networks in the SD-WAN space is based in Tel Aviv, and then a bunch of SaaS companies from Blend and finance software, ITSM software called Spoke, customer support like Gladly, and then other vertical SaaS companies. And before this, I spent almost 10 years running product at VMware from about 250 employees, about 15,000.
Hi, I'm Shlomi ben Haim, co-founder and CEO of JFrog. We are the company behind the software update of the world in the landscape of DevOps. And you put me between two VCs, so I hope that I'm saying the right things.
You're absolutely saying the right things. My name is Arif Janmohamed. I'm a partner at Lightspeed Venture Partners. We're early stage investors based here in Menlo Park, but offices in Israel. We've been actually investing in Israel for close to 2 decades, going back to Galileo in the 90s. More recently, companies like Extreme.io and Datorama. Thank you. I focus on enterprise technologies, enterprise IT at the infrastructure layer as well as the application layer.
Hi, Meir Amiel. I'm an EVP with Salesforce, responsible for our core product, engineering aspect, I should say. And we just acquired a couple of Lightspeed companies, MuleSoft and Datorama in Israel, so you're welcome. Been with Salesforce, as I said, for about 8 years. And I'm the executive sponsor for our team in Israel.
Great. So let's start with, I think, a topic that's on the minds of many startups here is really, how do I compete with the cloud providers, right? If I'm in a category where maybe there's an adjacent or even a very similar offering from the likes of Amazon, Microsoft, Google, right? Companies with 100 billion in revenue and really a massive amount of adoption. These companies have gone from storage, networking, compute to now many different services, whether it's analytics and DevOps and BI and databases and all these different things. Yet I think we've seen a lot of successes with companies, for example, like MongoDB. Their Atlas service is growing 400% year over year. You see Twilio with kind of also in that infrastructure space with a $7 billion market cap. So we have seen some successes. So I'm curious, what and we can start with Shlomi, maybe as a company that's recently raised, around over $1 billion market cap. At least that's what I read, or valuation. Sorry. What is the ingredient to doing this?
When my mother read the news, she asked me why we took so much money and how I'm planning to pay it back. So. We are less about titles and labels. We are focusing on exactly what you ask. How can we provide something that our users and community actually need as a pain solver? And you mentioned Mongo, you mentioned Atlassian and Twilio. And if you look for a pattern, I think that the pattern is something that was boosted and fueled by the community. So it's basically an enterprise that is fueled by the community and serve the community, and that's the way to build the business today. Otherwise, you're right. Everything is being provided by the cloud, and we are all great partners, customers, vendors. It's a big fat family, but we also know that if we will not run faster and if we will not provide something that will be developer-faced and bringing a pain solver to the community, then we would not be empowered by the community, and therefore the big cloud will eat us for breakfast.
So Jerry, do you think community kind of bottoms-up adoption, and maybe with developers in particular, is one of the key ways to do this, or are you seeing with some of your portfolio companies examples maybe of also kind of a top-down sales, enterprise sale model be successful as well?
Yeah, I think there's probably 3 or 4 ways to think about attacking the cloud. So what do the cloud vendors have that is hard to fight is distribution, right? So they own scale, which they have economies of scale, and they've which is nice. They have network effects for all the apps and the data, but they really own top of funnel for the developers, right? They own the credit card for the developers. So for them to sell an incremental service is just another push to the end user. So I think one way is what JFrog has done really well is own what I call the practitioner, which in many cases the developer. So if you own the audience, be it the Docker developer or the JFrog user, you get the developer or the customer before they actually get into Amazon or Google Cloud. So that's one way to do it. But the practitioner doesn't have to be a developer. It could be a line of business. It could be an individual designer or security professional. You just got to own the mind share of that community. That is there first. So first and foremost, own the practitioner, get to the end user before the cloud does. Second way is I think you say on the anti-cloud or the multi-cloud, where you say nobody wants to be locked in a single cloud. So you say, hey, if I want to be a database vendor, Elastic's IPO this past week was a huge example of that, where unfortunately not one of our companies, but there's multiple clouds you can run Elastic on. So I think the other way to angle is to sell to the classic buyer, but say you don't want to be locked in a single cloud. And the third angle is basically do something different or better, because I think that the cloud guys have reach and scale, but they can't do everything very well. So you focus on a workflow, you focus on a problem, you just own that end to end. I think it'd be fine as well.
I'd agree wholeheartedly with everything that was said here. I'd add one more thing, which is I think the cloud vendors are great for providing primitives, and those primitives are rapidly moving up the stack. Those primitives, as you noted, started with storage, network, and compute, but they have moved into other areas. However, what they do provide is ultimately primitives. And so if you're a developer inside an organization, inside an enterprise, it is still your responsibility to figure out how to pull together those primitives. So I don't know how many people here have little kids, but last night I was walking around trying to get some water and I stepped on a piece of Lego. I screamed, it was very painful, and that reminded me of the cloud. The cloud is a bunch of Lego blocks which developers need to put together in order to provide a full service, right? The primitives that the major cloud vendors have are geared towards developers. They're not necessarily yet geared towards enterprise. And so the opportunity is for smaller companies, startups, to pull together those primitives to provide things like security, things like compliance, things like audit, things like performance, scalability, et cetera. Package that up as a service that they can then resell to enterprises as a full solution.
So it's maybe appealing also to the non-developer by putting together a complete solution.
Yeah, the buyer in the case that I'm talking about is not a developer. The buyer is actually more a CIO or a VP engineering or a CTO. A great example of this would be Qubole, which essentially has pulled together a set of primitives on top of Amazon, on top of Google, on top of Azure, and those primitives are pulled together to offer big data as a service. They power Hadoop, they power Spark, they power Presto, they power other analytics, all on top of an Elastic cloud, but it's cross-cloud and it's fully compliant, fully performant, and fully secure.
I'd like to add to that as you look at the cloud, let's not forget there are also applications that utilize the cloud and is delivered utilizing that mechanism, right? If you look at Salesforce or companies like Workday and others, that's essentially how we built our business, leveraging the cloud to deliver value to non-developer and not technical folks. Now, and I know that we have a lot of entrepreneurs here and a lot of technologists, but we all have to remember that the move to the cloud has just started. Yes, we've been at it, but it's just started, and there is a lot of software out there in the enterprises that is still on-premise. The software that was built many, many years ago. And if you look at companies like, once again, like the Salesforce of the world, or like the Datorama that we just acquired, a company, an Israeli company, they look and they identify a buyer in those companies, right, in those enterprises that are looking to become more agile by moving to this cloud-based software. And I think that there is a lot of opportunities there if you are able to capture and develop those expertise and capture those specific markets.
Tomer, maybe just to add one sentence, look at the KPIs that the cloud are driven by. They would like to have traffic, more usage, more traffic. And when you mention JFrog and Atlassian and Elastic and Mongo, these are companies that brings another value and driven by a different KPI. So by default, we have to be better than the cloud provider that try to capture it all.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You talked in the case of Salesforce, right, about you talked about the cloud being in its early days, as much as we're talking a lot about it, right? And I think you acquired MuleSoft for something like $6.5 billion, and Arif here and the folks at Lightspeed were obviously very happy. One of the reasons I think for that acquisition was to help with that movement of data, right? It's maybe migrate some SAP kind of data and workloads into the cloud, into Salesforce. Do you see startups that have that kind of a sales motion or a go-to-market around helping, or a value proposition around helping companies move to the cloud? Is that something that's an attractive play for for you're investing in a startup, let's say, as a VC?
I've seen quite a few of them. I worry about their long-term sustainability because I know for sure that Microsoft guys as well as the Amazon guys are working very, very hard to enable enterprise workloads onto their cloud and enabling compatibility with what's on-premise, which in many cases is VMware or Kubernetes, et cetera, with their primitives on their cloud. So while there have been a bunch of startups, I worry that that is a place where there could be roadkill over the next couple of years because as Microsoft and Amazon start to become more mature around that specific area.
Or maybe everybody's already moved to the cloud, so it's done. Jerry,
Maybe.
what do you think?
I mean, I think there's still a ton of data yet to move to the cloud, but I don't think it's a zero sum. I think everything goes to the cloud, right? I think still because data gravity itself, it's hard to move all the data to the cloud. So I think, mainframes are still around for a reason. So there would still be a ton of data, a ton of applications on premise, which makes sense. I think that'll modernize to kind of what looks like a private cloud. But I think that the natural gravity, the growth is more and more cloud, is more and more data is born in the cloud. Right, so you look at the rate of change, and so I think move it makes less sense because where you build your applications will generate data, and that data stays in the cloud, and it creates this nice virtual cycle where you want to build more applications around that data. So the data that's born in the cloud, I think, is interesting because it has a higher velocity. So I think to Ara's point, you're going to see a generation of tools that let you either move applications to the data or move data to the applications. In general, I think it's been easier to move apps to the data than the other way around, just because the data is so hard to move around, it's so strategic. So I think you're going to see that natural push-pull. Is it easier to move the data around or move the apps to the data because the data is going to be born in the cloud natively?
Yeah, but I think the one thing to remember is that there is no one cloud. There are many clouds. And there is customer data and customer that is captured in those various clouds. So if you look at data movement or the need for one infrastructure to know about the other infrastructure, the need to backup, the need to apply various security and privacy policies into those various segmented data or data. I think that there's something interesting there.
And then I know this is a panel about cloud, and that's kind of the focus, but it does bring up a question here: is on-prem still is that still an option for companies, for startups? Nutanix is at a run rate now of I think $1 billion, right? So more than that. So do you see more companies being built around serving that category of enterprise customers that they're health insurance companies or financial services, and for the most part, I know they have some departments and use cases in the cloud, but for the most part, they are on-prem companies, I think, still.
I'll say something potentially controversial, but probably not, which is even 10 years from now, we're still going to have on-premise. Just as today, we still have people using mainframes. So we're in the early innings of moving to the cloud, very, very early innings. I know it's already been a decade, and it feels like we've been talking about cloud for a very, very long time. But if you look at the percentage of enterprise workloads that are in the cloud that are tier 1, it's tiny. It's absolutely tiny relative to the percentage of workloads, tier 1, that are on-premise. And still, there's still a huge amount of second-tier workloads that are still being managed, deployed, upgraded on-premise. And so I don't think it's cloud or non-cloud. I think for the foreseeable future, at least for the next 10 years, it'll be hybrid. And the companies that will actually succeed in the startup world will be those that recognize that hybrid, at least in the enterprise, is going to be a very important factor to consider.
First of all, I have to say that I joined some panels in other conference, and this is awesome. I feel like a big bar mitzvah here, so very feeling at home.
I thought it was because of the moderator. No,
that's
where
the
you were
only
going
thing
with
that jumped in my mind here. But speaking of the hybrid versus cloud-only movement, we raised our Series C 3 years ago, and every VC we met in the Valley, in Israel, in Europe, they all told us that we have to be focused on the cloud movement to the cloud. And we were focused, JFrog, obviously we are amphibian, we were focused on providing a hybrid solution. The answer to your question is just looking at the cloud providers. Google is working with Cisco to build a hybrid model, and AWS works with VMware to build a hybrid solution. Microsoft works with Microsoft to build a hybrid solution. But everybody understands that this is true. People want to have the freedom of choice, and they want to decide whether they want to have the combination of an on-prem solution versus a cloud only. And obviously, the cloud is more instant, the cloud is more fast, the cloud can provide you with an elastic way to grow. But people are looking for a hybrid solution that will keep the freedom of choice in their hand.
And freedom of choice, does that also span the different clouds, at least when it comes to infrastructure clouds, the big three? Do you think that's a key selling point for customers, to say you're not going to be locked into a specific cloud, Amazon or Azure, and you'll be able to switch tomorrow if you want? Do you think that's a key selling point that maybe helps the independent companies?
I think that if you look at the market today, or at least from the cockpit that I'm sitting at in JFrog, what you see is that AWS is still the dominant cloud provider. Then, Azure and GCP, Ali Cloud, and the other followers. But what you start to see is that big organization, and we sell, mainly to the enterprise, big organizations would like to have a multi-cloud topology. They would have their assets in the cloud, on-prem, and multi-cloud, and not just one big cloud that provide everything. And this is why, going back to your previous question, this is why the cloud providers are also adding more add-ons to provide a better service, a complete service, to convince people to move to their cloud, and by that to generate more traffic. So the answer is yes, multi-cloud and a hybrid solution.
So I have a different question here when it comes to kind of competing in the cloud, and the Lego analogy was great. So I have 4 kids and tons of Lego, and I step on them all day long. If the cloud providers are providing these Lego blocks, it seems like there are areas and specific domains where they have tried but have not been so successful as well, right? We talk about all the successes, but when I look at, for example, the BI world, really with the exception of Microsoft and Power BI, I think it's been a struggle for Amazon, for Google, I'd argue even for Salesforce. They'd have to kind of narrow their use cases for their kind of BI solution. Why do you think it is that the big cloud providers can be so successful in some areas and then struggle in others? Is it DNA? Is it a specific kind of network effect that they have and they can leverage in some areas but not others? What drives their ability to succeed in some kind of industries or verticals or areas?
I can start. I mean, the footprint of the applications down to the infrastructure that an enterprise consumes is just massive. I mean, it's hundreds of billions of dollars spent every year on IT, from servers all the way up through applications. And BI, I would argue, is more of an application than a piece of infrastructure. And so where we are 10 years in for Amazon is they started at the lowest possible primitives where they've bought a bunch of real estate, racked and stacked a whole bunch of boxes, tied them together, put some orchestration software on top of it, exposed that, and then said, how can we actually move from there into things like functions like Lambda, for example, or databases or other infrastructure primitives. I'd argue that BI is so far up the stack that there's a long way to go. And Microsoft has its heritage in applications as opposed to infrastructure.
I completely agree. I think that as you go through an evolution or of any technology or any technology shift, it takes time. You start with things that are a little less mission critical, and you move to things that are a little, kind of more mission critical. And I think that if you see both in terms of the pure cloud providers, the primitives, where you start with storage and you move through compute and so on, and you start with a Salesforce where you start with a little bit of an easier sell or a sell that, into your sales operation, then you move into functions that are more critical to, to the CIO and to the chief financial officer and so on. I think that there's just a natural evolution, and you're going to start seeing things like BI move to the cloud and being successful of the cloud as we evolve as our technology.
So let's talk a little bit about AI. I think that's the kind of the topic of the day, right? Maybe last year it was VR and AR, and maybe in between it was blockchain. But now AI seems to be the thing, right? And I know, Meir, you're talking about AI as being the fourth industrial revolution, right? And something that will really be here to stay and make a huge impact on every industry. What do you think? And when I look at it from, even just day-to-day conversations, I have one next door neighbor. He works on TensorFlow. The other next door neighbor works on Google's TPUs, and the other one does self-driving cars. That's gonna be. I live in Mountain View, so that's to be expected. But what do you think are the best opportunities that AI introduces when it comes to kind of new companies? And I'll start with Jerry. He's been quiet here.
It's funny. I think we went through this phase where every business plan was like AI washing, right? Like they put the word letters A and I.
We're still in that phase.
We're still in that phase. I think I went through this framework I created called Systems of Intelligence. Was basically, as a startup, it's hard to build AI or learnings on top of a data set that you don't own or is in the public data set, right? So Salesforce will always generate better AI with Einstein on top of CRM data, right? Workday will always generate better insights with AI on top of HR data. So for a startup, you have to basically build some level of intelligence across either proprietary data sets or across multiple data sets, so you have an edge or advantage that one of the big incumbents don't have, right? You're not going to do hot dog, not hot dog better than Facebook, right? Because they just have more image than everything else. So I think there's profound opportunities out there, but it's not going to be, let me out AI Salesforce in CRM data. Is there an applied use case? And I think self-driving cars is a natural applied use case of AI, or is there multiple other data records, systems of records out there that can create learning across, that plays naturally to a startup. So I wouldn't say go head to head against a large incumbent. I would say find a source of data in a vertical, healthcare, construction, fintech, transportation, or look for sources, multiple sources of data where I can build insights on that are cross data. I think those are the opportunities for innovation right now.
Yes, absolutely. I'd also add to that in that today's AI washing is getting kind of tiresome for VCs because every company has actually come in and pitched themselves, rebranded themselves from big data to AI. And for us, the challenge is really understanding which companies are actually using authentic AI and are getting better. So where are those companies moving from rules-based, algorithmic, to more machine learning, iterative, contextually relevant outputs. And where we see a lot of opportunity is all of enterprise software, actually. All of enterprise software is up for grabs in that everything that has been rules-based, from things like Salesforce to things like Datorama to every other stovepipe in the industry that we've been very familiar with over the last 25 years, all of those rules-based algorithms that are basically forms that people fill in will become transformed by AI. And what does that mean? That means that if implemented properly, either by the incumbents or by startups, that the machines itself, the algorithms themselves, the outputs themselves will actually become more tuned to the individual. They'll become more personalized. They'll become more contextually relevant. And rather than the software having to rely upon what was in an engineer's head when that engineer was writing the software itself will surface relevant outcomes, data, et cetera, to the user, him or herself. And that is very, very interesting. I mean, one of the places where I was surprised that AI has actually taken off is actually in corporate travel. Ariel, I don't know if you're in the room, but Trip Actions is a company that 3 years ago I didn't even think of as an AI company, but now it's blindingly obvious that what the amazing entrepreneurs at Trip Actions are doing is actually creating an AI company that is changing the way that you travel for business. Why? Because when you fire up your Trip Actions application, it knows already where you want to go. It knows who you want to travel with. It probably knows where you want to stay. And you can actually book in 5 minutes or less as opposed to taking an hour or 2 hours. That is contextually relevant outcomes that are driven by AI. And the reason it can do that, to Jerry's point, is that Trip Actions is actually able to generate its own data exhaust, its own proprietary data set on which it can train its own models. So, to tie the loop here, I think that every single part of the enterprise is up for grabs for AI, and any company that in 5 years is still relying on purely rule-based algorithms is going to be out of business.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that we, if a few years ago we were still at the hype stage, I think that we're out of the hype stage. I think that we are absolutely, there are critical business processes that can be replaced by those various AI technologies. And I think that if you're looking at any enterprise, there are many people today that are employed by enterprises that are using various spreadsheets to crunch data in various functions. And each one of those functions can be disrupted by those types of technologies. If I start a company today, I would start that company as an AI company and a mobile company. And that's the future of the enterprise.
Do you want to start a company?
No, we're being recorded right now, so let's chat about it later.
I thought we were at a bar mitzvah here.
My grandmother is going to light a candle a little later.
So what do you think is the next big area for new companies? Is it identify a space that hasn't been disrupted in a while and you can own the data, and then of course the algorithms need to be the modern kind of AI algorithms, or is it more on the infrastructure side, supporting it with maybe faster AI ASICs and all sorts of new innovation at the platform level as well?
Who are you asking?
Anyone?
I'll take a. Go ahead. No. Well, I would argue that we're so early in the AI revolution that the entire stack is up for grabs. Whether it is silicon, and there've been multiple companies in the silicon space. If you told me 15 years ago that there'd be a new chip company built by VCs, built by entrepreneurs and funded by VCs, I would have said you're crazy. But we're now seeing a revolution around the silicon. But we're also seeing platform companies like Domino Data Labs come out, which enable the users, the practitioners, to actually build models and collaborate on those models. And then as I mentioned, Cloud plus AI enables a brand new breed of application software to come up that is more personalized, more contextually relevant, more consumerized and friendly, which delivers better experience to end users. And so the entire stack is for grabs. I would also argue that there's a huge amount of opportunity in terms of looking at what has typically been manual labor that has needed some level of human intervention. And so an example of that could be audit, right? It's a tedious task. Not a lot of people like to sift through lines and lines and lines of call it expenses or invoices or contracts or whatever it might be. And this is a place where machines that are actually taught by humans and improved by humans, so human in the loop AI, a place where machines can actually do much better jobs than human beings can actually do. So I think there's going to be a huge revolution around, call it intelligent robotic process automation, or the things that have been typically outsourced to human beings.
I fully agree, but I would just add that if you look at the last trends in the startup world, what you see, and I don't really mind if it would be named AI or DevOps or even IoT, that was a big buzz. But what you start to see is that every trend is a combination of the machine power and the human power. And I don't know about human innovation more or less, but I know that every time that I see a new trend in technology, it combines the human power with machine power. Look at DevOps and what happened in DevOps. So I guess that this is a cloud panel, and if you are asking about the next cloud trend, you will see a lot of automation in the world of security in the cloud. And we are still in the very early stage of cloud security. I think that you will see a lot of automation about software updates, because it just doesn't make sense that the world that we are living in have some primitive software updates procedures and process. This will be changed with or without, a title. So the next big trend. And again, I'm not a VC, so I know that every company that wants to raise money now should put an AI or a DevOps or something like that. But the world of automation, the world of the machine power and the human power will keep be the next trend.
Okay, great. Let's transition a little bit to more on the go-to-market side of things when it comes to companies and maybe interacting with the cloud providers. I think in the past, you could partner with companies like EMC and Cisco and HP and others, right, and kind of establish these kind of reseller relationships, OEM relationships. I know when I was working at a previous company, we had set that up with EMC and Cisco, and that was very beneficial. I want to say about 2 years ago, I had the opportunity to meet a senior executive at AWS, and everybody warned me in advance that you're not going to get anything out of them. They've never partnered. They've never had a partnership that's been beneficial to the other side. And actually, that was the first question I asked them when I came to the meeting was, hey, can you give me some examples, before even sharing the slides, can you give me some examples of startups that you've partnered with and that's led to significant value to the startup? And really no answer. It was joint marketing kind of stuff. So are we basically, when it comes to the large cloud providers, are we now in a world where it's kind of the app store model? It's the, hey, I got the app store, I have the marketplace, we'll list you here? Or do you think there are more opportunities than that? And I think we're starting to see a little bit more of that now, especially with Microsoft and Google maybe. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's partially the channels and the route to markets are different in this world in terms of they own the developer and it's mostly self-service versus kind of account exec driven. But that said, there are opportunities to partner deep with the cloud. So one of our companies, Trifacta, that's in kind of the data preparation space, did a deal with Google Cloud where Google Data Prep is now powered by Trifacta. So it's a case where Google was notoriously NIH, not invented here, is actually basically OEMing essentially Trifacta's technology in the cloud service to do the data prep. And the opportunity there is one, you have to be world-class at one problem, so they're world-class in data cleaning, data preparation. And number two, it benefits Google because what Trifacta does, it helps clean and prep the data to be ingested by BigQuery or one of their databases. So it's definitely a case where you help Google drive more business, but you resell them. I think that the trickier thing is when you partner with one area of the cloud, you're probably competing with another area of the cloud. Because they are so large and so huge. Like you think about the database services like Snowflake or whatever, you'll compete with the Redshift, but yet you drive business on Amazon with storage and compute. So it's interesting now to partner the cloud because before like EMC or Dell were kind of one or two business lines, maybe they had other businesses that competed. These cloud guys, especially that low level infrastructure, are so ubiquitous that you have to find one group and make them your best friend, right, knowing very well that the other ones might be competitors. It's possible, but it's not easy to do.
Yeah, that's a good point. And Mike, I'd say that Microsoft is probably being the most aggressive about partnering, and that's driven very much from the very top of that company. And so if you've got a startup that can demonstrate that you can drive their equivalent of compute and their equivalent of storage, well, then you can get quota relief for the people in the field, and so the field will then start pushing you. And so if you can align yourself with the field, notwithstanding the fact that there might be something else in their bag to sell from the cloud vendor, then you can align yourselves. And so we've seen a number of companies that have done quite well there, especially with Microsoft. And I'd say that Amazon takes a little bit more of a marketplace approach, although again, if you can drive more EC2 and S3 in the field will push you, even though you're not necessarily on the partnership page.
Yeah, I think it's something we've actually experienced ourselves when we made a number of enterprises, Royal Caribbean and Diageo, the maker of Guinness and Johnny Walker, made them successful on Azure, and they start consuming a lot of resources. All of a sudden, Microsoft becomes very excited, and that's both at the kind of solution architects and sales reps, and also at the kind of the product teams. You talked about self-service, though, as the way that these products are being taken to market now, right, Jerry? You said that. I think it's definitely kind of true of Amazon, right? I think Microsoft, obviously, a lot more sales-driven as a company historically, and also in the way they approach Azure. But I think we're also seeing. Recently we were trying to hire a sales rep here in the Bay Area, and we lost to Amazon, who had offered her $400K OTE with a 2-year non-recoverable draw, right? Something that's kind of unheard of. And I think we're seeing, they probably see it as a land grab from a cloud provider standpoint. They're willing to throw a lot of money at these salespeople. The question then as a startup is how do I leverage that sales force? What's the best way to get them to want to sell my product, right? And there's lots of things you can do. You can convince them that will help consume, kind of burn down the resources that they're committing to, and all sorts of things like that, right? Help people move to the cloud. What have you seen as ways in which startups have been successful in kind of getting the field organizations at these larger companies to drive their own products in one way or another?
I can start with our experience, and it representing our own micro world, but I don't think that you should be focused on how do I get the cloud to sell my product. The first question you should ask yourself, who do I sell to? If I'm selling to the community, then I want the community behind me. And then what I'm saying to the JFrog team is that we should be the traffic light to the cloud highway. They want our traffic, and we should be the traffic light. So if the community is behind me, and GCP, AWS, Azure, they would like me to generate traffic to their cloud, then they will work for you. If they will see no value there, they have tools that competes JFrog, they have tools that competes everyone. AWS can replace all food, right? So I think that if you can generate traffic, you will get their attention. And if you cannot, then everything else is just mumbling partnership and all kind of putting the logos one next to the other. It will not generate sales.
Take it one step further. Figure out how those people in the field can retard quota. So how do they get into accelerators faster, and how do you align yourself so that you can actually get them into accelerators faster? If you can do that, they'll sell your stuff.
I mean, in our case, right, it's all about creating solutions. We have an app exchange, which is our marketplace, but when you look at that, the inventory there, it's basically various partners and various other companies closing holes, right? Basically addressing needs of our customers that we chose not to address at this moment. And when a sales rep is trying to help a customer create a solution, right, they will look at what we bring, right, their bag, what we bring out of Salesforce, and they will look at the partner ecosystem to complete that solution.
Another thing that kind of popping out here is the fact that we speak about cloud as it's one big vendor. I think that there are some differences between the cloud providers, okay? Azure is very enterprise focused versus GCP that early adopters will feel more comfortable in. Now Microsoft is becoming more community friendly, and Google started with this Kubernetes revolution. I know that AWS is still riding the wave of being the first cloud, but when you speak with each and every one of them, you actually understand it's a completely different DNA between the three, well, let's say, leading providers.
Absolutely. Cool. So maybe last question here from me, and then let's open up to questions from the audience. What do you think is the next set of startups that will emerge and become kind of that next unicorn that are maybe just starting up today when it comes to kind of cloud and cloud infrastructure and maybe some cloud applications as well?
Well, those ones are still in stealth. So, but I will say one thing. So
I think VCs don't sign NDAs though, right?
This is a really important company that's being built. It's about 5 years old now. But if you do believe in cloud, if you believe that applications will move from the data center into the cloud, which they are, it's clearly being demonstrated, and that will accelerate over the next 10 years. If you believe that applications being built will move onto the cloud at the infrastructure layer, and that is being accelerated. And if you believe that there's actually a platform in between which lets developers actually develop faster, then you can invest either in those layers, and there's going to be a lot of money being made in that. But I think you alluded to it. The first derivative of any application stack or infrastructure stack is actually security. And so I do strongly believe that the next large company will be the company that builds the security cloud. And that security cloud will be the cloud that actually secures your infrastructure, secures your platform, and secures your applications. And I'm heavily biased when I say this, heavily biased when I say this, but I believe that Netskope is building the security cloud. This is a 5-year-old company that now now sits in front of the application stacks of Salesforce and Marketo and ServiceNow and Workday, and you go down 3,000 other applications, and for some of the largest enterprises in the world is the first hop for those companies before they get into their applications. So Netskope is a third-party vendor, a trusted security vendor that actually provides security at all layers of the stack.
So I have to give Jerry here an opportunity to talk about one of his companies too, I think.
I could say something not so nice. I'm kidding. We sold our company to McAfee already in the same space, so it's totally fine. But I actually, just to leverage that, I love what Arif saying around security, but I think in compliance and privacy is a 2 to 3 year trend. Just to be very specific about it, I think what you're seeing around all the GDPR, all the trust and privacy issues we're having around Facebook, Google, and Europe, that I think specifically, one, multi-cloud will be a thing, and a multi-cloud means private cloud, public cloud, or hybrid cloud, across all the multiple clouds, plus all the SaaS companies like Workday, Salesforce, and ServiceNow, plus all these API services from Stripe to Twilio to whatever. So you have so many endpoints and so many clouds, so many databases. Security matters, but what I think a CIO really cares about is, holy cow, am I a violation of some regulation by the EU or by the government? So I think if I would look at a 2 to 3 year buying trend as a founder of VC, I would think, what budget do I attach myself to, right? I think the cloud budget's one. This privacy budget in the next 2-3 years is going to be a big one. That can be handled at the developer layer, the database layer, the cloud layer. But I think tapping into this privacy compliance meme that's really prevalent right now is probably a super interesting opportunity right now.
I think that one thing that I hear more and more from CIOs is that we are all in the business. We are in the business of fast. We are not in the business of this domain or another domain. Everybody, including my daughters, would like to have an instant user experience. They want to have everything now, ready, secured, fast, delivered. And if you look at the CIO kind of decision-making process, and they look at their competitive landscape, what they need to make sure is that they are faster than their competitor. And it doesn't mean it doesn't really important if you are a CIO of a big bank or if you are a CIO of a high-tech software company. Everybody wants to have their software available fast and secure. And AI and security and all of this, and even the reason that we are here speaking about the cloud is about how fast can we push software from the developer to the end user, to the edge compute, to whatever edge we use. And each one of us have, small clouds in our pockets every day. So I think that the next big thing would be companies that make this process faster, more automated, clever, and secure.
Cool. I think if somebody can...
Like JFrog.
Like JFrog. There we go. Yeah, if I could ask for something, it'd be something that makes enterprise contracts faster. That'd be very helpful for us.
I have a product to sell you.
Just got to get the other side to agree to these contracts. That's the problem. Okay, let's open it up to questions from the audience.
Be friendly.
I don't know if we have a microphone.
Remember, we're in a bar mitzvah here.
So what about like curbside computing, like small clouds, but not the endpoint, something that consolidates endpoint and does, I would say, regional computing before, yeah, like a distributed cloud. What about that?
Question was, what about a distributed cloud that runs in different regions?
Yeah, it's I think I've heard people call this this trend or edge computing or edge of the internet, right? So I think what you're thinking about is kind of like a CDN or next gen CDN, where basically instead of being static context, it's more dynamic. I think that's a thing, right? For sure, there's opportunity. The question is that opportunity for startups vis-a-vis the current CDN guys like Akamai, Cloudflare, et cetera, or the cloud folks themselves, like Amazon, Equinix, et cetera. So I think it's a legitimate paradigm. I've seen a bunch of companies in that space. This edge of the internet, I don't know if that's a great space for a startup or not. But I think that'll be a thing for sure. It's like, I'll call it the next turn of the CDN.
I would add that, according to the last researches I've read, there are 52 billion devices today, and each of the devices providers, even if it's your car or your air condition or your smoke detector at home, start to build the next generation that will act like your own personal private cloud, distributed cloud, or edge compute. And everything that have to be pushed need to be pushed directly to that, because you care about three things and three things only when you use whatever edge. First thing is the power. You need it to be empowered. The second thing is the connectivity. It needs to be connected to whatever CDN net or internet. And the last thing is that you want it to be updated. So I fully agree that what we will start to see is distributed clouds, and I know that all of the big providers are already starting to distribute their own cloud, because it comes with a lot of power and it's very personal.
You're actually already seeing some of the trends towards that with the way that Chrome is built, which is essentially a mini operating system within an operating system. And so it does local processing. It pulls data from the centralized cloud. It processes that locally, optimizes it for your personal needs, and then provides an output to the user. So that's an early point of view, at least from a device perspective, around an edge cloud that's being built.
And hopefully your car doesn't rely on like the AT&T network to make decisions around braking and things like that.
Do you guys have anything that is disagreeable?
Which guys?
Fine. It seems that you are all in agreement, so do you have anything that is disagreeable?
I told them at the beginning that I felt like my role in moderating a panel, especially with an Israeli audience, was that there had to be blood. If there was no blood, the audience would not be happy. And I think I failed. What do you guys disagree on?
What do we disagree on? My favorite color is blue.
Come on. Somebody, Jerry, what's your favorite color?
I think the question, the disagreements are in the specifics, right? I think it's hard to argue that mobile or cloud or AI are good things or whatever. I think the question is always, when it comes down to it, if you had to ask each four of us to force rank 1 through 4, 4 different companies or 4 different trends, where would you put $100? That's the disagreements. Because I think in the long run, it's hard to argue these trends aren't going to happen. I think the specifics is what matters. And so I think if you really want disagreements, the details matter. And I'm one to be specific more than less.
Sorry. I don't know that we disagree on something, but I would say, one of the things that we keep talking about is because we are, here with startups is the developer experience and, Amazon is easy or AWS is easy, but the reality it's not, right? It is hard. It's hard to, build an application on top of Amazon. It's hard to build an application on top of GCP. So if you look at kind of my view or our view as a Salesforce of the world is that we need to make it easier for the enterprises to take, to leverage those cloud facilities by creating those, declarative platforms, so creating those mechanisms that are more approachable to your typical enterprise. So I look at it and say, we're talking a lot about, the Silicon Valley type developer, but what about those individuals that are like the low code, no code personas that are really the vast majority of individuals in the enterprise that are delivering value? Shlomi spoke a little bit about the CIO. So I talk to a lot of CIOs as well, and all of them are talking about digital transformations. So what do they really mean by that? So what they mean by that is agility. What they mean by that is we want to be able to take a business requirement and change it in minutes or days at the most. And yes, AWS gives you some or a lot of those very interesting capabilities, but unless you have a developer, you're not going to get to value very quickly. So then the question is, what's on top of that?
I think that if you're looking for disagreement, you need to have some cloud providers in the panel. Because what I said about multi-cloud, they will disagree, obviously. What I said about understanding the enterprise, they will disagree. And I think that what I predict as the next future in the cloud, they will disagree about that as well. So I'm in a disagreement with the cloud providers. And I think that the hybrid model is not something that obviously they will support. But everything that was mentioned here kind of makes sense. Meir is now speaking about the digital transformation, just to make the point of what is the real next generation of user experience. I would ask you a question, if I may. Okay, how many of you, raise your hand, are using Twitter or LinkedIn? Thank you, 100%, right? I will give $1,000 to someone in the crowd that will tell me what version of LinkedIn he used.
This might be somebody from LinkedIn.
The latest, right? You don't know. You don't know because you don't care. You just want it to be updated, and the fact that LinkedIn is pushing 7 times a day software update is what you care about. You want it to be updated. So here you will not find disagreement. You will find disagreement with the providers that cannot catch up with this user experience.
And to reinforce that point, I did have a conversation with one of the senior execs at one of these large cloud providers, and he basically came back and said they have a policy of not doing panels with potential competitors.
Well, some of the VCs here invested in our competitors, but that will happen behind the scene. We will close it.
What's the next evolution after serverless? And you see that, pace of innovation not confusing companies to adopt the cloud, because it came the container, now functions, and the next evolution. So what will be the next junction, and do you see delaying cloud adoption because organizations are not choosing between the different steps?
I think you want to ask the Docker investor here, the expert.
So the question was about the transition from like regular client server to containers to serverless, and it gets harder and harder to build applications because you have to learn the whole new way of doing it, right? And so isn't that going to hinder adoption?
We're still early days containers and super early days of serverless. So I don't think they ever replace. I think they layer upon. right? So I don't think anyone says, I'm not going to do containers, I'm waiting for serverless. I'm not going to do serverless because I'm waiting for whatever comes after serverless. I think these applications work together, right? So if you look at how serverless apps are being used, you have existing app that'd be monolithic or whatever, and I want to add some functions around it quickly. It's easier to do functions as a service. No, I think very rarely do you see kind of a de novo app built just on serverless. Some, but I think what you're going to see, all these compute paradigms layer on top of it. It's like, are you saying, hey, there's no more COBOL because everything's on Java. There's no more Java because of JavaScript. There's no more JavaScript because I'm going to use like Rust or something like that or Haskell. Like, I think these are all, just like there's multiple languages, there's multiple paradigms. And I think there's different reasons why you use, the different paradigms, mostly for productivity of the developer. But I don't think anyone would say it's going to be all or nothing. So I think as a developer, you want them all. As a CIO, you kind of want them all as well, because whatever makes my developers faster, it's great. And you got to pick the right tool for the right job. And I don't see any CIOs. You guys probably talk to more CIOs than I do. No one's saying, hey, I want to wait to what's after serverless before I decide what's in serverless. Like that's like saying, hey, I want to wait to the season finale of Game of Thrones before I watch season 3 and 4 or whatever, right? It's you want to use them all because they're all going to make you better in the present moment. And to your point about speed, Shlomi, it's if I can get value now from containers or serverless or Kubernetes, I will. It's not, the slowness isn't waiting for what's new. The slowness is just operationalizing those tools. And it's like all these things, they take time.
This is the first panel where I've ever heard the words COBOL used. Nice work, Jerry.
He was pretty good with all these languages. Huh?
Bingo.
One last question, I think we have time for. Okay, we're done. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.